Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Director of the Marshall Center, Lieutenant General Retired Keith W. Dayton.
This will be my shortest introduction ever, which is a good thing. Welcome to all of you as we gather here to commemorate the 70th anniversary of George Marshall's speech at Harvard, where he unveiled what became known as the Marshall Plan. And I'm delighted that you can all be here with us. Before I get started, and I'll only talk about 1 minute, I do want to thank you 5 members of the Hiesz Music Corps from Ulm. You honor us by your presence. Thank you very much. Well done. Well, special welcome today, not only to our distinguished guests, but to Mayor Sigrid Meyerhofer. I know there you are, who has been a tremendous supporter of the Marshall Center since she has become the Lord Mayor of Garmisch-Partenkirchen. We also have a very special group called the Friends of the Marshall Center. These are people, German citizens who live here, who sponsor our international students in a variety of ways, and they take very good care of them, and they make their experience here in Germany something truly special. So again, thank you, all you friends that are here. It's great to have you. I also have a few special guests from the Partnership for Peace Consortium. I'm not going to name each one of you, but all of you senior leaders, it's very good to have you present with us as well. And finally, we have a class in session now, a community of interest event on cybersecurity. We have about 40 members from 30-some countries, and all of you over here, thank you again for joining us. You just happened to hit the right time to be here, so you would get this sort of a presentation from both the defense ministers of the United States and from Germany. Again, the namesake of George Marshall, that's our Marshall Center, a very strong and growing German-American partnership. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other person in the audience, and that is our good friend, Dr. von Geyer from the German Ministry of Defense, who I personally feel had a lot to do with making our new memorandum of agreement and making our friendship and relationship even stronger. So Andreas, thank you again very much. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is the Minister of Defense of Germany, Dr. Ursla von der Leyen. She has been the Minister of Defense since December 2013. All of you know a lot about her. She is the first woman in this post for Germany, and I think Germany could not have chosen better. And it's a great delight that you have decided to be here with us today. And with no further ado, I'm going to invite you to come up to the stage and speak to us. Dr. von der Leyen.
Vielen Dank, Herr
General Dayton, thank you very much. Brigadier General Berger, thank you very much. Thank you that I have the opportunity to be here today. Jim, how wonderful is it to be here together with you and to inaugurate the strategic partnership, the strategic dialogue with you. Also, Landrat Speer and Madame Mayor Meyerhofer, guests from Bulgaria, from Austria, from Romania, from Sweden, and the Friends of the Marshall Center. To all of you, a wholehearted welcome. Also, my greetings go to the staff members of the George C. Marshall Center and to all the members of the Bundeswehr. Ladies and gentlemen, there are dates that are not only matter-of-fact events in history, but they are turning points in history. Such a date was, and there's no doubt about it, the 8th of May of 1945. That is when the Wehrmacht surrendered. That is when the Second World War ended here in Europe. But it is also the date when freedom overcame dictatorship, when Europe was liberated from the criminal regime of National Socialism. Europe was a continent in ashes. Millions of people were displaced. There was hunger, desperation, despair. But only a few years later, Western Europe experienced a unique recovery. People again had bread and work. the citizens and streets were rebuilt, small shops and also larger scale enterprises started to flourish. But what was most important was that the people regained their belief in a future of democracy and social market economy, and thus a belief in their future. And this unique development is also marked by a special date, which is the 5th of June of 1947. On this day, the former US Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, gave his memorable speech at Harvard University. He announced his very bold plan. He said that the European states should be supported in their recovery efforts in order to regain peace and stability. And although at that point the world still knew nothing else but the memories of a cruel war launched by Germany and the destruction of the cultural heritage, the Shoah, the Holocaust, still George C. Marshall believed in a global responsibility of his country, and he was convinced that long term it would be in everybody's benefit and it would be in the interest of the United States to reach out to the defeated, to bring them back into the nation, into the community of nations, and to give people hope. The 5th June 1947 is therefore a historic date for my country, but also for Europe and for our transatlantic friendship and partnership. Today, when we celebrate the 70th anniversary, we are celebrating George C. Marshall as a great American visionary who received the Nobel Peace Prize for a very good reason. And we are also celebrating the United States of America, because back then, by implementing generous, courageous, and sustainable measures, the United States back then demonstrated greatness and foresight. And Germans and Europeans will forever be grateful to the United States for it. Today, we are looking back to decades of peace and stability and prosperity in Europe. The foundation was laid by the Marshall Plan. Marshall delegated to us, the Europeans, the responsibility for these investments. The United States limited itself to a supporting role. And by doing so, by trusting us, the Europeans, who just a few years ago had been mortal enemies, by trusting us with responsibility, this idea of a close European linkage, a close European bond, became tangible. The European idea has many mothers and fathers from many European states. For example, in March, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. But one thing is for sure, without the vision of the Marshall Plan, and without the willingness and the will of the United States after the war not to withdraw, but to be there for Europe, to engage in Europe. Without this vision, European integration would not have been successful in the way it was. The Marshall Plan is a centerpiece of our common German-American and European-American history. And it is the foundation for our enduring decade-long friendship and partnership. George C. Marshall, also looking back at his time, he tells us a lot for how to orient ourselves in today's world. To cooperate, to invest into partnerships, that really pays off, be it within NATO, but also on a bilateral basis in the German-American friendship. And the transatlantic partnership is a bedrock commitment. Together, we strengthen our liberal Western world order. Together, we stand for democracy, freedom, and human rights. We trust each other, we know each other, we support each other. And Germany, therefore, has a vital interest in a strong and reliable partnership with the United States. And the world needs a United States that that will continue with its strength. But on the other hand, we also want to strengthen our forces and to be reliable partners for the United States. We stand side by side in our shared beliefs, for example, in protecting our partners in the East by the enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states and in Poland, or when it comes to jointly fighting against ISIS, or when cooperating in Afghanistan, our cooperation in the past 15 years. All these topics have been discussed in our strategic dialogue, but Germany will always stand by its partners and will be a reliable partner and will fulfill its commitments. We Germans are very happy for the American engagement and commitment here in Europe, and we, the German people, appreciated that the United troops are still stationed here in Germany. It is this experience that has brought us together, and in Bavaria I can see how close the relationships are between the Bavarian people, the German people, and the American troops, and there are many friendships that witness this close relationship. But we also understand that being partners, we need to have a fair burden sharing within NATO. That means we Germans need to do more for our security, and therefore we acknowledge the commitments based on Warsaw and Wales. And when it comes to defense expenditures, then we are working towards 2% of the GDP. This is in our own interest. It's in our own interest to equip the Bundeswehr, to make sure that our service members are equipped accordingly in order to make sure that they can fulfill their missions, because after all, we expect that they fulfill their missions and do the job well. It is also in our European interest to work towards European Defense Union, to strengthen the European pillar. We want to stay transatlantic, we want to be reliable partners, and we want to grow as Europeans. The European Defense Union is something that we work towards, and it will be able to take on more of the burden of our common transatlantic security, not in competition to NATO, but as an addition, as a strong partner. Europe has a vital interest in a stable neighborhood. But if we want that, if we want to have stability in the neighboring regions, then we have to commit ourselves to it. And this is completely in the spirit of George C. Marshall, which means we have to take on responsibility and we have to act accordingly. As Europeans, we know from experience what you need and what is necessary for enduring peace. What you need is to be able to fight terrorism. You need a strong police. You need a strong military in order to put a stop to adversaries of democracy. You need reconciliation to facilitate the spirit of humanity. And you need investment so people have work and can support their families. You also need political visionaries. You need a strategy. You need clear-cut goals. And you need the rule of law as a guardianship for everything. Europe does have the instruments for it, but it needs to do much more in order to pool its resources and to become active. And I think it's time to act, and this is what we are doing. The European Council said very clearly last week what is being necessary, and I hope that until the end of the year we will have very concrete results. More common planning with NATO in order to expand our capabilities, more common investments and joint investments in order to help grow and help support the European pillar, to bring civilian and military elements together in an appropriate way, and much more has to be done. As Europeans, we have to take on responsibility. It is important that defense and stability is being based on the transatlantic bond. After all, this bond has supported and has brought peace and stability and common values. But as Europeans, we do want to take on more responsibility, but without ever forgetting where we have come from. That is why, dear Jim, I'm happy to have you as a colleague. You and I can talk openly and clearly with each other. There's a broad spectrum of topics, of common topics that we are discussing. And that is why we decided to solidify our cooperation beyond current issues. And that is why today we started the German-American Strategic Dialogue. And I think this is in a special atmosphere to inaugurate this dialogue, and I think it's the right place to start it. And that is why now I would like to say a few words to you, General Dayton. The George C. Marshall Center is exactly the right place for launching and supporting our strategic dialogue and deepening our transatlantic partnership. This center embodies a deep transatlantic bond, and it does so in an especially lively way. And it is in the spirit of its name giver that also international partners outside the North Atlantic Treaty are being engaged, are being included into the security political discussions. We have just welcomed our guests, and the geographic ranges from Morocco to Mongolia. People from 143 nations have come to the Marshall Center, and more than 12,000 civilians and military have participated in courses of the George C. Marshall Center. So it is a smart, long-term, and sustainable investment in security and peace worldwide. Therefore, this very unique common joint institution is so near and dear to us. And I'm very happy that the Germans have now increased their financial support, and also there is more German staff here at the Marshall Center, and this is to emphasize the relevance of the very valuable work here at the Marshall Center. Sir General Dayton, cherishing the transatlantic partnership and supporting its values and fundamentals also outside the borders of our alliance, this is what you and your staff are working toward every day. And you are doing this with great dedication and with lasting success. The Marshall Center, your center, is a beacon of German-American friendship. And this friendship is being lived here, and we can all feel it. Dear General Dayton, for your incredible dedication and commitment to support the German-American partnership and for our transatlantic values worldwide, I would like to thank you with all my heart. And as a visible sign of our gratitude and appreciation, I would like to present to you the Cross of Honor of the Bundeswehr in gold. Now, that might be a surprise to you, but it comes from all my heart, and that is why, General Dayton, I would like you to please join me here on stage. On behalf of the Federal Republic of Germany, I would like to present Lieutenant General Keith Dayton for his honorable and meritorious service to the Federal Republic of Germany, the Cross of Honor of the Bundeswehr in gold.
Jim, I don't know how you follow that. But it is my deep personal honor to first of all, Minister, thank you very much. I had no idea. And this is an honor that is far beyond my worthiness, but that's for another day. It's my great honor to introduce the 26th Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, Jim Mattis. He is a personal friend, but he is a great leader. And he is exactly what I believe my country needs at this time. I think my president chose extremely well when he picked Secretary Mattis. And Jim, the floor is yours. Please come up here and talk to these people.
Well, thank you, Keith, old friend, Minister von der Leyen. There is probably no one that I would rather be here today with than my esteemed fellow minister, the first minister to call on me after I had the surprise of being assigned to this job, I might add. Thank you again for making the trip to Washington. But I would also say that there's a connection between us. We did not sit down and write our speeches together. Yet as I was listening to her and nodding to myself, I thought, my gosh, I'm going to bore everybody with the same themes that you just heard. But Madam Mayor, thank you for all of the hospitality that all of us receive when we come to this beautiful corner of the world. It is absolutely a stunning place to visit. And ladies and gentlemen, it is wonderful to be back in Germany once again, to pay my respects to an ally that is 100% committed to freedom and the dignity of human beings, and to show America's solidarity with the German people in standing up for Western values for which we are unapologetic. I cannot come to Germany, however, without expressing my deep respect for this country's troops, for their professionalism, for their courage, and for their sacrifices on shared battlefields from Afghanistan and against ISIS or any other agents of terror and all around the world. Because for the German military and for you here today from the German military, I would just say that your ethical performance is a model for all others. And we in the United States Department of Defense are grateful for our strong alliance with the German military. Minister von der Leyen and I just completed the inaugural strategic dialogue, as you heard. And between Germany and the United States, we charted our shared security priorities for the coming year in this perfect locale for that, in the finest spirit of what George Marshall stood for. We talked about Afghanistan, the enhanced forward presence in Eastern Europe, and our national security strategies. And I would just cite that regardless of any news reports to the contrary, the transatlantic bond between our two countries remains strong. Germany and the United States stand together, allied against threats to the peace and security of this continent, Canada and the United States, and disruptions of harmony elsewhere. The U.S. commitment to our NATO Article 5 security guarantee is ironclad. As demonstrated over decades, our steadfastness and given voice more recently by President Trump before the American people in the Rose Garden, with a NATO ally, Romanian President Iohannis, standing at his side, and certainly it was given voice by the United States Senate just a short couple of days ago in a unanimous resolution, 100-0. All of this transatlantic bond is represented in this room here today. And 70 years ago, as Minister von der Leyen noted, on a picturesque campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, an American diplomat gave the commencement address at Harvard University. I need not remind this audience again of what George Marshall said that day, for we can see today across Europe the realization of what became a shared vision, a peaceful, industrious, and prosperous continent, free from tyranny, possessing the military strength to defend itself from aggression. And sometimes it is necessary to pause and recall first principles. We can take things for granted after a while if we do not. We need to remind ourselves of why we initially embarked on a path of why free people of Europe, Canada, and the United States made a conscious decision to codify our transatlantic partnership and dared to bind our nations by treaty to collective defense. All free nations, democracies, any one of them could have opted out with the wish of avoiding danger, yet they united together. In the North Atlantic Treaty Article 5, the parties stated that they agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against all. And in North Atlantic Treaty Article 3, we bound ourselves to share the burden of defense, saying that parties separately and jointly, by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, will maintain individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. So, ladies and gentlemen, how did a man named George Marshall come to give a speech that so eloquently articulated the principles underpinning today's international order? Why does the International Center here today bear his name still 70 years later? And the simple answer is that he lived at the hinge of history. Having joined the Army, George Marshall was sent off to fight in a catastrophic conflict, World War I, in which 1.2 million doughboys came to pay America's debt to Lafayette. He lived war, and he lived all of its injustices. When the armistice came, Marshall went home to America and lived through the Great Depression, seeing grown men and women with despair in their eyes. For 20 years, he learned and he matured, watching the storm clouds gather again over the continent he had left behind. When the storm broke in 1939, he witnessed the failed peace of 1918. 14% of Europe's pre-war population was killed or displaced during the Second World War. Our nations experienced the horrors that can only happen when freedom is imperiled, when peaceful pursuits of civilized life are suspended, when deterrence fails and our societies are engulfed in total war. When, at enormous cost, the force of arms had restored peace to this continent, the peoples of our nations gazed on that destruction. And the U.S. Secretary of State to be, George Shultz, not yet the Secretary, but coming home, a young officer who had served in our World War II Pacific campaign, he spoke for a generation when he said that they look back on world wars, a generation that saw 61 million people killed, that saw the Depression, and they said to themselves, what a crummy world, and we're part of it whether we like it or not. Longing for a safer future, the greatest generation, as we call them, saw their own security in the security of others. They had the courage to recognize all collective efforts had to be taken to avoid repeating mistakes that opened the door to war. And should freedom be threatened and war truly unavoidable, then all efforts had to be taken to bring war to a decisive end as swiftly as possible. They also had the courage to act, not just to look at it, not just to talk about it, to make the necessary sacrifices and to make genuine commitments to keep the peace. That generation, schooled by life's cruelties, by severe economic deprivation and the death of friends and family members, stood face to face with the competitive, zero-sum side of life. The vileness of the Second World War, waged on a scale unimagined, perhaps, other than by those with memories of having lived through it, nevertheless left the generation aware that there is more to life than war and competition alone. In 1947, Europe lay in ruins, starvation, poverty, desperation, and chaos clamored to dictate the future. And enter Marshall, who saw his generation's moment and transcribed its lessons. It is logical, he said, that the United States should do whatever it is able to do to assist in the return of normal economic health in the world, without which there can be no political stability and no assured peace. Under the Marshall Plan, the United States provided billions in aid to Europe after the war as part of a larger effort to rebuild and secure the continent. Marshall knew history swings on a hinge, and the Marshall Plan permitted hundreds of millions to keep their humanity, confident of the basic social order, from food to security, rule of law, and essential political freedom. 20 years after the plan took effect, the per capita gross domestic product of UK, France, Italy, and Germany had more than doubled. But to keep the peace, a resuscitated Europe had to become a partner in it, as Marshall said, and as Minister von der Leyen just pointed out. It is neither fitting nor efficacious, he said, for the U.S. government to draw up unilaterally a program to place Europe on its feet economically. This is the business of the Europeans. The initiative must come from Europe. As Marshall told the UN General Assembly in Paris in 1948, international organizations cannot take the place of national and personal effort or of local and individual imagination. International action cannot replace self-help. And so out of destruction and unified by that notion, our peoples built a great new world. The Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and World Bank, the United Nations, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Marshall's generation built these tools to help underwrite stability and prosperity. The last 70 years have proven the value of these institutions and the wisdom of that generation. Europe transformed from a security consumer into a security provider, something Marshall ardently desired, for he never envisioned that America would carry the burden alone. He knew from experience it had to be shared, both its benefits and its burdens. Since World War II, European allies have contributed to large-scale U.S.-led global operations. At peak contributions, 39,000 allies fought with the United States in Afghanistan, and 59,000 allies fought with us in Iraq. We must not allow the years passed since 1947 to blind us to the reality of today. For those of us who grew up with freedom from fear, from starvation, and the burden of world war, we cannot turn away from the responsibility to pass these same freedoms intact to the next generation. Allies stick together, as we did 69 years ago this week, when the Soviet Union blockaded Berlin and the United States refused to abandon it. U.S. Air Force Captain Billy Phelps flew 167 flights into that stranded city, bringing food and coal to save its inhabitants from starvation and bitter cold. Captain Phelps was 26 years old the night his cargo plane crashed a mile from the end of the runway. A German boy named Wolfgang Samuel saw it happen. Wolf wrote, "They fell like a rock out of the sky. The two pilots were killed." And then the child had a flash of insight. He said, "Only 3 years ago, they were fighting against my country, and now they were dying for us. I wondered," he said, "what made these people do the things they did?" Captain Phelps knew he owed future generations the same freedom he had, and what young Wolfgang, a little German kid, saw that cold December night in 1948, we can see clearly today in 1917. We can see foreigners putting their lives on the line for others, whether Captain Billy Phelps of the Berlin Airlift or the men and women of NATO's enhanced forward presence under German leadership in the Lithuanian woods right now. We can see U.S. support for NATO's forward presence extended out to 2020 for the security of the United States and all NATO nations. We can see the $4.8 billion requested by President Trump last month for the European Reassurance Initiative, an increase over our commitment last year. Beyond any words in the newspapers, you can judge America by such actions. This is who we are: America, Germany, Europe, the West. Why we risk life so a child in Berlin can eat. We hunt terrorists in the dark so that they cannot murder innocents at concerts, and our nations stand together, democratic islands of stability in a world awash with change. The Marshall Center embodies this cooperative mission. It is the only one of the U.S. Defense Department's 5 regional centers to operate jointly with a foreign government. It is one of many tangible manifestations of the enduring alliance between Germany and America. In October last year, Germany and the United States signed a memorandum of agreement and reinforced a strong U.S.-German partnership here as Germany assumed an even greater role in the operation of this highly influential security studies center. As the minister noted, over the years, over 12,000 individuals, civilian and military, from more than 150 countries have come to Garmisch to transcribe the lessons of history and apply them to today's challenges, from organized crime to terrorism, cybersecurity, and regional threats. Marshall Center alumni comprise a network of thought leaders and practitioners serving as resources to one another and decision makers worldwide, recognizing that no nation alone can provide for its security. In 2014, for example, Romanian and Greek alumni contributed together to one of Europe's largest drug seizures, preventing $220 million in heroin from poisoning children and families across this continent. Marshall Center faculty have also assisted Albania and Moldova in drafting their first ever national security strategy documents, critical for enabling security integration and contributing to regional stability. The center's faculty, staff, students, and alumni carry the legacy of this center's namesake. And for you students here today, when you return home, you have a golden opportunity to operate at history's hinge as well, just like George Marshall did, to close the door to war, exercising your moral authority and your generation's responsibility to protect freedom. Western values, respect for a rules-based order, and for national sovereignty, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the dignity of the human person, these are values worth defending. Marshall said ideals have power to inspire. And he also said discouraged people are in sore need of the inspiration of great principles, principles represented today by you in this room. I'll conclude with a message to the nation choosing to challenge this secure and peaceful order. The United States seeks to engage with Russia, and so does the NATO alliance. But Russia must know both what we stand for and equally what we will not tolerate. We stand for freedom, and we will never surrender the freedom of our people or the values of our alliance that we hold dear. I mentioned a moment ago that discouraged people in need of inspiration, and there are millions of people like that who live today in Russia. Their leader making mischief beyond Russian borders will not restore their fortunes or rekindle their hope. And while we will meet with any aggression with what Danish Defense Minister Claus Frederiksen said was determination, deterrence, and purpose, we will also watch for a Russia that honors its people enough to abide by international law and so win for them the peace that we all offer. NATO's troops are deployed right now as we speak in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and they demonstrate NATO's resolve. I am grateful to those host nations as well as to the framework nations, Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, and of course, Germany, for sending their fine troops to lead in this wholly defensive mission, augmented by troops from 10 other NATO nations. This is a profound example of a united NATO. Our alliance has long been a stabilizing force in Europe, and it helps preserve the rules-based international order today. And it serves again now to keep the peace and defend the shared values that grew out of the Enlightenment. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, in 1961, a young academic and German immigrant to America, one who had served in the U.S. Army and was a veteran of World War II, paid a visit to the Missouri home of former President Harry Truman. The president was in his late 70s and long since retired. The academic was none other than Henry Kissinger, and he asked Truman what in his presidency had made him the most proud. Without a moment's hesitation, President Truman said to him that we defeated our enemies and then brought them back to the community of nations as equals. Today, we make our adversaries the same promise. Enemies of freedom will be frustrated or defeated. Supporters of international law will be brought into our community as equals. Our hands rest purposely on history's door, and it depends on us to push it in the right direction. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
and gentlemen, this concludes today's event. We ask that everyone please remain seated until after the departure of the distinguished visitors and their staffs. Thank you.